I never thought I'd end up telling this story. But here I am, the only one left who remembers what happened at that motel. And I can't shake it off, even now. It was a long drive from Austin to Dallas. I had been on the road for hours, and my eyes were starting to get heavy. It was past midnight when I saw the sign. A small, faded blue light with the word vacancy flickering on and off. I had just passed through a stretch of road that was completely isolated. No lights, no signs, just miles of empty highway. My car was old, the engine sputtering every now and then, and I had no choice but to pull over for the night. I thought, it's just a motel. Nothing weird. But as I drove up to the entrance, something about it felt wrong. The parking lot was empty, except for one old sedan parked in the corner. I almost turned around, but I was exhausted. So I parked, grabbed my bag, and walked up to the front door. It creaked open with a sound that almost made me jump. The interior smelled of old wood and dust. The man behind the counter, tall, gaunt, with unkempt hair, didn't smile. He just nodded and handed me the key. Room 8. It was the only room available. And for some reason, I didn't ask any questions. Something told me not to. I walked down the dimly lit hallway, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the silence. The building was small, only a few rooms on either side. It looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades. The wallpaper was peeling, and the carpet was stained, worn from years of use. The door to room 8 was at the very end, as if the place had been built to keep people far from each other. I slid the key into the lock and opened the door. The room was sparse, with just a bed, a lamp, and an old TV on a rickety wooden stand. The curtains were drawn, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. Nothing special, just a place to crash for the night. I set my bag down, locked the door behind me, and threw the bolt. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin itch. The hum of the old air conditioner in the corner was the only sound, and even that was muffled. I tried to settle in, threw my jacket on the bed, went to the bathroom, and washed my face. But there was something unsettling about the mirror. It was cracked, just slightly, as if someone had tried to repair it with glue. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I turned off the light and lay down on the bed, but sleep didn't come easily. My thoughts kept wandering back to the man at the front desk, his eyes cold, calculating, and that weird, unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. Then I heard it, a knock at the door. Not a polite knock, but a slow, deliberate tap. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. Who could it be? There was no reason anyone would be knocking at my door this late. I didn't move. I just listened. The knocking continued, each tap growing louder, like someone was trying to get in. Tap, tap, tap. The knocking stopped as abruptly as it had started, but the silence that followed was suffocating. I lay there paralyzed. I didn't move, didn't even breathe too loudly. I stared at the door, my mind racing with 100 possibilities, none of them good. I thought about calling the front desk, but then I remembered how odd the man had looked, how distant, how unsettling. Maybe it was just someone else staying in the motel, but no one had been around when I arrived, and the parking lot was still empty except for that lone sedan. I sat up slowly, then stood, my legs unsteady, and walked toward the door. My hand hovered over the handle, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. My heart pounded louder, and I started to question myself. What was I doing? Was I just paranoid? Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just tired. But then I heard it again. The sound of someone breathing on the other side of the door. A slow, shallow breath. In. I stepped back, my stomach twisting into knots. I was frozen. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something. I grabbed the phone on the nightstand and dialed the front desk. Hello? The voice on the other end was the same low, gravelly tone as before. I think someone's at my door, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There's knocking, and then I heard someone breathing. There was a long pause before the man replied, Room 8? There's no one else here. It's just you. I swallowed hard. My mind raced. I tried to ask more, but he hung up without saying another word. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no one else there? Then who was at my door? I stood there in the dim room, the phone still clutched in my hand, the silence stretching out before me. I was paralyzed, staring at the door, wondering if I had imagined everything. But the feeling in the air, the tension, was too thick to ignore. The breath, someone was still out there. And the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, prickling with dread. I paced around the room, trying to keep calm. My thoughts were racing. What was going on? I needed to leave, but something told me that if I opened that door, whatever was on the other side would be much worse than staying inside. I stood by the window, peering through the cracks in the curtains. The parking lot was still empty. But then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed movement. I snapped my head back to the window, my breath catching in my throat. There, in the corner of the parking lot, was a figure. A person standing by the old sedan. But it was the way they were standing that made my skin crawl, perfectly still, as if they weren't even breathing. The streetlight flickered above them, casting long, unnatural shadows. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel their eyes on me. I was sure of it. I turned away from the window, my pulse hammering in my ears. What was going on? Was this all a sick game? I took a deep breath and reached for the door handle, slowly turning it. My heart nearly stopped when I heard the sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window now. Soft, slow, rhythmic, like someone's fingers drumming against the glass. I couldn't take it anymore. I flung the curtain open, my eyes scanning the parking lot for the figure, but there was no one there. I opened the door instead, stepping out into the hallway, half expecting something or someone to jump out at me. But there was only the quiet, that same stifling, suffocating silence. I walked toward the stairs, determined to get answers. I needed to speak to the front desk again. I couldn't just stay in that room. Whatever was happening was escalating, and I wasn't about to find out what would happen next. As I passed room 7, I saw a light flicker through the cracks in the door, but there was no one there to greet me when I knocked. Just silence. I turned to the front desk and, as I approached, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The man who had checked me in was no longer behind the desk. Instead, the chair was empty. The front door was ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. And then I heard a voice, a whisper from behind me. "Go back to your room." I froze. The voice, soft and raspy, echoed in my ears, sending a chill through my entire body. It came from behind me, yet I hadn't seen anyone approach. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath shallow. But when I spun around, there was no one there. I was alone, except it didn't feel like I was. The air felt thicker now, heavier, like something was closing in around me, something unseen, but very real. I could almost feel its presence pressing against me, a weight I couldn't explain, suffocating the space around me. "Go back to your room." This time, the voice was closer, and I could feel a presence, something looming, watching me. I turned and rushed back toward room 8, my footsteps echoing down the hallway. The walls seemed to stretch, the hallway too long, like it was bending at the edges of my vision. The door to room 8 was ajar now, just slightly, and the air that hit me when I stepped inside was freezing. I hadn't touched the air conditioner. The room felt wrong. I couldn't explain it. It was as if the space itself had changed in my absence. The shadows darker, the corners deeper. The bed was undisturbed, but I noticed something else. The mirror. It was no longer cracked. It was shattered. The shards weren't scattered. They were positioned precisely, as if someone had carefully arranged them into a pattern. A pattern that seemed to move, the edges of the glass reflecting something that wasn't there, something that kept shifting the longer I looked at it. My reflection, but not quite. There was something off about it. My face was contorted, twisted into an unnatural expression, like I wasn't in control of my own body. I blinked, and for a split second, I saw a figure standing behind me in the reflection. I spun around, but there was no one there, just the sound of my own breath, ragged and panicked. I backed away from the mirror, my chest tight, the air thick with fear. Then I heard it again. A voice. "You shouldn't have come here." This time it wasn't just a whisper. It was louder, a low growl vibrating through my chest. The room seemed to close in on me, the walls pressing together, the light from the lamp flickering wildly. My mind was screaming at me to get out, to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. And that's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, methodical, getting closer. Someone was in the hallway. I could hear them walking toward my door, the distinct thud of boots on the old carpet. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my back against the wall, gripping the edge of the bed, trying to steady myself, but I couldn't stop shaking. Then the door creaked open. The door opened with a slow, agonizing creak, and I froze. Every muscle in my body was locked in place, my breath shallow and quick. There, standing in the doorway, was the man. The one from the front desk, the gaunt figure with the hollow eyes. But something was different. His face was pale, almost gray, his lips cracked and dry. And his eyes, they weren't the same. They were darker now, black as ink, with no pupils. His gaze pierced through me, as if he could see straight into my soul. He didn't speak, just stood there in the doorway, motionless. But the air around him was heavy, like it was thick with something evil, something that didn't belong. For a moment, I thought I might scream, but my voice wouldn't come. He took one step forward, then another. I backed away slowly, my legs shaking beneath me. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears, drowning out the silence between us. His movements were unervingly slow, deliberate, as if he was savoring the moment, savoring the fear that had taken hold of me. What do you want?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. His lips twitched into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. But it wasn't a smile. It was a grimace, a twisted, unnatural stretch of his mouth. "You should have left," he whispered, his voice rasping like gravel scraping against stone. My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to run, to get out of that room, but my body wouldn't move. It was as if the air itself was holding me in place, trapping me in that room with him. I could feel his presence getting closer, the air growing colder with each step. I tried to speak, to yell, to do anything that might break the suffocating silence. But before I could, the lights flickered again, this time more violently. And when they flickered back on, he was gone. Just like that, gone. But the room had changed. The bed was now turned toward the wall, and the mirror, it was shattered completely, the glass covering the floor in sharp, jagged shards. The shadows in the corners seemed to have deepened, as if something were hiding just beyond the edge of the room, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I ran to the door, throwing it open with everything I had. But the hallway was different. The hallway was no longer the same, no longer the one I'd walked through earlier. It stretched endlessly in front of me, with no visible end, like the motel itself had shifted and swallowed the path. My pulse raced, and panic surged through me. I was trapped. There was no way out. I could hear the footsteps again, louder now, closer. I turned to run in the opposite direction, but something was blocking my path. I looked up and saw it. The figure. It was standing at the end of the hallway, staring at me. Only this time I could see it more clearly. It was no longer just the man from the desk. It was something more, something that wasn't human. And it was getting closer. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The thing at the end of the hallway. It was coming closer, step by slow step, its figure shifting and flickering like a mirage. At first, I thought it was just the dim light playing tricks on my eyes, but then I saw it for what it truly was. Its limbs were unnaturally long, bending in ways that human bodies couldn't. Its face, if you could call it that, was stretched and distorted, with skin pulled tight over a skull-like structure. No eyes, just dark, hollow pits that seemed to pull at the light around them, absorbing it. The air grew colder with every step it took, and the walls themselves seemed to close in, contracting around me. I didn't have time to think. My survival instincts kicked in, and I turned on my heel, running down the opposite hallway, heart thumping in my chest. I could hear the thing following, its footsteps soft and deliberate, just behind me. Each time I glanced over my shoulder, the figure was closer. I reached the end of the hallway and found the stairwell. My hands were slick with sweat as I grabbed the railing and hurried down the stairs 2 at a time, my legs threatening to buckle beneath me. I didn't care. I didn't look back. The front door, it was still open. A sliver of moonlight cut through the darkness, but I knew I couldn't stop. I had to get out. I had to. But as I reached the door, I froze. Something was wrong. I stepped into the night, and the air felt wrong. The world outside wasn't what I remembered. The motel, the parking lot, everything had transformed. The landscape stretched impossibly far, and there was no road, no highway, just endless, black nothingness. The sedan that had been parked in the lot was now gone, leaving only the empty space behind. Then I heard it, that unmistakable sound, a low, guttural laugh. I whipped around, and there, standing in the doorway of the motel, was the figure. It wasn't walking anymore. It was standing still, watching me, but its form was shifting, constantly changing, the edges of its body rippling like a mirage. The laughter grew louder, as if it were coming from inside my own head. "You can't escape," the voice whispered, coming from everywhere at once, the words crawling into my brain. "You're already here, forever." I stumbled backward, my legs refusing to hold me up as I tripped over the uneven ground. The figure in the doorway stepped forward, the shadows around it deepening. I could hear it moving toward me, its distorted body contorting and stretching, every step sending a wave of pure dread through my body. Desperation surged within me. I pushed myself to my feet and turned toward the dark, endless void behind me. There was no direction, no path to follow, but I couldn't stay there, not with that thing getting closer. I ran into the darkness, my mind whirling with panic, the sound of its laughter chasing me through the void. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, when I thought I might lose my mind entirely, I felt something. A cold hand, sharp and icy, brush against my back. I gasped, spinning around, but there was nothing, only the void. And then it was quiet, couldn't breathe. The silence that enveloped me was deafening, almost suffocating. I stood there, surrounded by an endless expanse of nothing, the cold creeping into my bones. The thing that had chased me, that thing was gone. I couldn't hear its footsteps or its laugh anymore. But it didn't matter, because the real horror wasn't what was chasing me. It was what had already happened. I turned in a slow circle, trying to understand. Where was I? The air felt wrong. The very ground beneath my feet seemed unreal, like it was shifting, alive. I looked up, expecting to see the night sky, but there was nothing. No stars, no moon, just an empty black void that stretched forever. It felt like time itself had stopped, as if I had crossed some kind of boundary and was no longer part of the world I once knew. I had ran until I couldn't feel my legs, until my body was on the verge of collapse. But no matter how far I went, no matter how fast, I couldn't escape this place. And that's when it hit me, the realization that I had been trapped. Not just by the motel, but by something far worse. The motel, it wasn't just a place. It was a threshold, a doorway to something beyond understanding. People had come and gone, but none of them had left. They were all stuck, we were all stuck forever. I don't know how long I stood there in the dark, waiting for something to change, anything to change. But nothing did. The truth slowly sank in, and I realized that I had become just another lost soul. I didn't know how I had died, when it had happened, or if I had ever truly been alive to begin with. But the answer didn't matter. The motel had claimed me, and now it claimed all of us. Then I heard a voice again, the same voice that had whispered before, but this time, it was not just in my head. It was all around me. "You were never meant to leave." The shadows around me twisted and pulled, closing in like a noose. I tried to scream, to fight back, but my voice was swallowed up by the dark. My body froze, my limbs unable to move, as the void wrapped tighter around me. And then, just as I thought it was over, I saw something, a faint glimmer, like a candle burning in the distance. I tried to move toward it, to push through the suffocating dark. But it was too late. The darkness overtook me, and I was swallowed whole. And that's how it ends. But I survived. How? I don't know. But when you're trapped in a place like that, when your mind is lost in the shadows, there's no escaping. The only reason I'm able to tell the story is because I made it out. Somehow. But I know one thing. The motel is still out there. And it's still waiting for the next person who's foolish enough to think they can survive. If you ever find yourself on that lonely stretch of road, you might see the sign. It might say vacancy in flickering lights. Don't stop. Don't ever stop. Because if you do, you won't leave.